We live so much under the shadow of sudden death that one sees things very differently to ordinary times. Life is normally complicated. Here it is savagely simple. Eat while you can. Help all you can. Sleep when and where you can. And above all, grin and keep a stiff upper lip. Even a mechanical smile is better than an anxious look. Worrying is not good for the men. Percival Fenwick.
When World War I began, men in Britain and its empire rushed to enlist. Joe Murray, an 18-year-old miner from County Durham, joined up, much to his mother's dismay.
Why did I enlist? I simply thought I must. Something told me I should, and as I wished to see the world, this was my great opportunity. Don't worry, Mother. I shall come back safely enough. I am positive of that.
Guy Nightingale was a 23-year-old British regular officer serving with the 29th Division.
Guy Nightingale was a son of the British Empire. He was brought up within the ruling class system. He went to rugby school, he was educated at Sandhurst, and then he joined his regiment. His regiment became his home and his family, as it was for many soldiers and officers at that particular time. He became wedded to it. He became a part of him and he was a part of it.
Salahuddin Adil was a Turkish career officer with the Dardanelles Force Command in the Mediterranean. His wife, Siret, was in the Ottoman capital, Istanbul. She had just given birth to their first child.
November 1914. Dear faithful Siret, I am so sad that under the present circumstances, I am not able to comfort you and see your sweet face as you take care of our child with affection. I hope that peace will come after these difficult times. Salahuddin Adil.
February the 19th, 1915. The British and French fleet's attack on the Dardanelles began. The plan was to sail through to the Ottoman capital, Istanbul, knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war, and open the route to Britain's ally, Russia. Because no troops could be spared from the Western Front, the operation was to be carried out by ships alone, without landing a single soldier. Two men lay behind the plan: British Secretary of State for War Lord Kitchener and First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill. Most of the politicians in the British War Council approved it, without checking earlier intelligence reports on the Dardanelles.
There is no plan for when they get through the Straits, except that the Turks will surrender. That's the plan. That's what everybody's going on. That's what they're expecting to happen, and that's why this operation really is going to succeed. The Turkish government will be so impressed, the Turkish people so overawed by a squadron of British battleships off the Dardanelles, off Constantinople, that they'll immediately throw up their hands and surrender.
But for 3 weeks, the Turks and their German allies resisted the attacks against the Dardanelles. The War Council decided to dispatch British troops to the area and use the Australian and New Zealand troops training in Egypt to aid the Navy. George Bollinger was a bank clerk from New Plymouth, New Zealand. His German father had emigrated in the late 1870s. At 6 feet 4 inches, he was one of the tallest men in the New Zealand Expeditionary Force. Walter, known as Bill Ledley, was one of the shortest men in the New Zealand Army. He was working as a telegraph operator in Christchurch when the war began. The 31-year-old Ledley was a devout Christian, whose diary was filled with verses from the Bible. Ellis Silas was a 30-year-old artist from London who had immigrated to Australia in 1907. At the outbreak of the war, he reluctantly enlisted as a signaller, after changing his mind several times.
I hate war books, soldiers and soldiering. I've not read a newspaper since the war began, and I don't intend to do so. All I know is there's a war on, that I'm doing my bit, and I'll be glad when it's over. How I hate this terrible life. Ellis Silas.
Oliver Cumberland from Scone, Australia, had enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force just to be with his younger brother, Joe. They both wrote often to their sister, Una. She had brought them up since the death of their parents.
Dear Una, I couldn't see Joe go alone and remain behind myself, and I think it will be better now we are together. I promise you I will never leave Joe wounded on the field whilst I have the strength to carry him off, and I know he will do the same for me. Oliver.
Cairo, Egypt, 12 March 1915. Dear old Una, we have finished our training now, and we are only waiting for the word to come for us to go to the front. I will be real glad when we do go. It won't be so monotonous there as it is here. I reckon they ought to put us all in the firing line and let us finish the Germans as soon as possible. I remain your loving brother, Joe.
You see from their letters it was very simple to them. It was simply a matter of helping Britain, defending the empire. It was not something you had to think about a lot. And in that sense, they were very typical of thousands of Australians who rushed to enlist.
March the 18th. With international expectations rising, 18 British and French heavy warships approached the Dardanelles for a decisive attack. Lieutenant Colonel Salahuddin Adil put his troops on alert. Captain Hilmi Sanlitop, a Turkish fort commander, issued a final order before the impending battle.
No one will bother with the dead and wounded. If I die, walk over me and just pass. And if I get wounded, pay no attention. I will do the same with you. Those who will replace the wounded and the dead have been determined. Don't expect any rewards in war. This I will not and cannot promise. I knew that if I waited any longer, the damage in my fort would get worse. Taking full responsibility, I opened fire. But because I started to shoot alone, nearly all the ships turned their fire on us. The battery became smothered in smoke from all the shells that landed. The artillery sergeants could not even see the sea, let alone their targets.
Towards 1 o'clock, the battle reached its climax. The situation was telegrammed to Istanbul every 10 minutes. Some shell fragments started to fall near our lookout post. Saladin adieu.
But the mobile howitzers and the guns of the forts slowly began to inflict damage on the ships. At 2 p.m., the already damaged Bouvet was rocked by an explosion. The Bouvet sank in less than 2 minutes, taking down 600 French sailors.
When the Bouvet sank at 2 o'clock, it had a tremendous effect on everyone's morale because it could be seen from all around. The soldiers used this pause in the battle to clean the guns' rails and oil the cannons' breech blocks. Saladin adieu.
A few hours later, HMS Irresistible and HMS Ocean struck mines and sank in the same area. By 7 o'clock, it was all over. The ships had hit the mines laid only 2 weeks earlier by the Turkish mine layer Nusrat, in an area reported safe before the attack began.
This is a colossal naval disaster for the British and French. 1/3 of their ships are either sunk or out of action. The Turkish guns are nowhere near running out of ammunition. They can keep on doing this for some time. The British and French can only do it another twice, or they haven't got any ships left.
On March the 22nd, 4 days after the attack, the British military commander, General Sir Ian Hamilton, and the naval commander, Vice Admiral John de Robeck, decided to land an army on the Gallipoli Peninsula. The objective was to capture the shore defenses before the Navy resumed its advance. Kitchener approved the plan, and Churchill offered his support. No one in authority objected. On March 24th, German General Otto Liman von Sanders was given command of 65,000 Turkish troops to defend the Gallipoli Peninsula. Hamilton's plan called for the French to land on the Asiatic shore and the British on 5 different beaches at the southern tip of Gallipoli. The Australian and New Zealand force known as ANZACs would land further north. After securing the beaches, the British and the ANZACs would then move inland, capture the heights, and seize the peninsula's shoreline. It was an intricate plan based on a strict timetable. "In my mind," said Hamilton, "the crux was to get my army ashore." He expected the Turks to run once he landed.
I don't think they really sat down and thought about it. The problem was the immediate problem of landing an army. How that army would fight, where it would go, that was tomorrow's problem.
There was a terrible lack of knowledge about the true state of the Turkish army, and above all, there was a lack of understanding about what any troops will do when they're fighting for their homeland.
The landing was set for Sunday, April the 25th.
April 15th. I find it very difficult to believe that every minute brings us nearer to the guns of the enemy. Ellis Silas.
April the 23rd. My dear mother, it is most thrilling, and I am looking forward to the time when we are ashore. We land on Sunday morning at dawn and are the first troops to do so. Your son, Guy.
Gallipoli. Dear Surette, I am leaving with my division for the front lines today. I pray to God for victory and embrace you and our child with affection. It will probably be very difficult to write from now on, but I'll try to keep you informed whenever I can. I entrust you to God and my brother for protection. Seladin Adir.
April 23rd. Operation orders have been given out. Our troops are very calm, and they're now fully aware of what is ahead of them. They have to invade an enemy's country under the eyes of its own forts. Infantry alone are landing under the assistance of our warships. George Bollinger.
By midnight on April the 24th, the British and Australian ships were off the Gallipoli coastline. At 3 a.m., the Australian boats silently began their approach towards the shore.
Well, dear old sister, you never know what is going to happen. So if anything does happen to Oliver or I, don't let it upset any of you too much. Because, dear Una, you must remember that thousands of sisters are losing their brothers daily. Don't get gloomy over this letter, because we are not dead yet by a long way. In fact, I have never felt better in all my life, and there was never a Turk or a German born or a bullet made that could kill a Cumberland. From your loving brothers, Oliver and Joe.
At 4:30 a.m., the first Australian troops landed, surprising the 200 Turks guarding the shore. But the Australians were hit with a surprise of their own. They faced a narrow beach with sheer cliffs and scrub-covered gullies.
Instead of the 3,000-yard front that they were intended to land on, they landed on a front of about 600 to 800 metres, with the boats mixed up, with the units mixed up, and a huge problem of confusion on the beaches and in the gullies as they moved inland.
Despite the confusion, the Australians moved quickly inland. Only 10 Turkish soldiers out of the company of 200 survived the attack. The survivors fought as they retreated. They needed reinforcements, and they needed them fast. closest Turkish force was the corps of the 27th Regiment, camped 7 kilometers away. Its commander was Lieutenant Colonel Mehmed Shifik.
We could hear the roar of many rifles in the distance. We knew that this roar meant that just a handful of our comrades from the regiment, far from any help, were trying to do their duty under great hardships against an enemy with much superior numbers. Lieutenant Colonel Mehmed Shifik.
At 5:45, Mehmed Shifik began his march to stop the Australian advance. But he would not arrive for 2 hours. As the Australian assault progressed, the British launched Hamilton's main landing further south at Cape Helles. The 6-kilometer coastline targeted for the attack was guarded only by a single Turkish battalion of 1,000 men. At 5 a.m., the ships opened fire on the Turkish shoreline. Major Mahmud Sabri, the Turkish battalion commander, watched the bombardment from the hills.
A lot of shells were falling side by side and exploding one after another. Some of the firing trenches that had been dug to protect lives now became soldiers' graves. When the trenches were leveled by shells, those who remained alive took shelter in the craters and built new trenches. Major Mahmud Sabri.
The French and 3 of the British landings were made with relative ease. But there were 2 other beaches with formidable defenses. At W Beach, the Lancashire Fusiliers met heavy fire, and casualties were high. But despite this, they managed to secure the beach and capture the Turkish positions on the cliffs. The ultimate success of all the landings depended on V Beach. Only a single Turkish company defended the natural amphitheater, but they were well dug in. The British main force approached in open boats, and the River Clyde, an old collier carrying 2,000 soldiers, including Guy Nightingale.
"6:22 a.m. Run smoothly ashore without a tremor. No opposition. We shall land unopposed. Lieutenant Colonel Weir de Lancey Williams." "6:25 a.m. Tows within a few yards of shore. Hell burst loose on them. 6:35. Connection with shore very bad.
As each boat got near the shore, snipers shot down the oarsmen. The boats then began to drift, and machine gun fire was turned onto them. You could see the men dropping everywhere, and of the first boatload of 40 men, only 3 reached the shore, all wounded. The place was a regular death trap. Guy Nightingale.
In 15 minutes, the men in the open boats were reduced from 700 to 300, most of them wounded.
After a time, I noticed these men sunk from exhaustion and loss of blood and were drowned. The water by this time all along the shore and especially around the boats was red with blood. The shore now was littered with dead from the boats, and some of the wounded, who could, had managed to crawl up the beach and were under cover of a bank. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Tizard.
The 3-foot-high sandbank on the beach meant the difference between life and death.
Given the strength of the defences at V Beach, had the Turks levelled this bank, almost all of the troops would have been wiped out. But thankfully this bank remained.
When the River Clyde grounded, the pontoon bridge that was intended to connect it to the shore failed. So its captain, Commander Edward Unwin, with one sailor, jumped into the water. They lashed a few lighters together and managed to form a makeshift bridge. Unwin steadied the ropes by using himself as a post. He then signaled to the River Clyde for the disembarkation to begin.
Their commanders and officers had drawn their swords and were sending the men down the ladders, but they were observed and could not escape the Turkish bullets. Not one of our soldiers' bullets was fired in vain. In fact, in many cases, one bullet accounted for several of the enemy. Major Mahmoud Sabri.
3 out of every 5 who tried to land from the River Clyde were hit. Guy Nightingale landed safely onto a barge that was being used as a pier, but the barge was packed with dead and wounded, so he was ordered to go back to the ship. He landed a second time later in the day.
He was possibly unique on the 25th of April in that he landed twice from the River Clyde and remained unscathed throughout the day.
There were more than 1,000 British casualties at V Beach. The landing had failed. By 8 a.m. further north, 8,000 Australians had come ashore, including Oliver and Joe Cumberland. At the same time, Lieutenant Colonel Mustafa Kemal, the commander of the Turkish Reserve Division, began his march to stop the ANZAC landing. It was now a race for the heights. Shortly after 8 a.m., Mehmed Shifik was in position. Around 8:30, he attacked. Mehmed Shifik's attack confused the Australians. Wounded and stragglers were everywhere. Troops searched for their officers and orders. Many lost their way in the rugged terrain. The New Zealanders came ashore later in the morning. Bill Ledley landed around 10:30.
When I jumped into the water, it came up to my neck. I held my rifle above my head and waded towards the shore. But halfway there, I stumbled into a hole in the sea bottom and went right underneath the water. I lost my rifle, but soon managed to scramble out of the hole and reach the beach safely. I quickly obtained a rifle from a dead Australian and joined up with the rest of the signallers from the other barges who'd gone ahead. Bill Ledley.
As Oliver Cumberland rushed up one of the cliffs, he was shot in the thigh and taken back to the beach. All along the peninsula, plans for evacuating the wounded broke down. Hospital ships quickly became overcrowded, their staffs overwhelmed. Ships which carried mules and horses were converted into hospital transports. Many wounded died on the ships during the trip to hospitals in Alexandria. Others died on the beaches as they waited to be evacuated. As soon as he landed, Lieutenant Colonel Percival Fenwick, a New Zealand doctor, rushed to attend to the wounded.
At one time, over 400 were lying on the stones waiting to be moved. I dressed as many as I could, but it was a dreadful time. The shrapnel never ceased. One poor chap who had his tongue and jaw shot away could not speak, but wrote on a scrap of paper, "I'll be well soon, and have another smack at them." Percival Fenwick.
By 10 o'clock, Mehmed Shafiq's troops were under heavy Australian fire. His right flank was commanded by Captain Hallis of Yushak, a seasoned professional soldier.
You could see in his face that he did not believe the situation was in our favor. I tried to understand why his face turned more and more pale, and the confident look in his eyes faded away. But in a short while, the reason became apparent. The khaki cloth of his left arm slowly turned red, and blood drops accumulated at his fingertips. Lieutenant Ahmet Mujib.
Soon Hallis was forced to seek treatment for his wound. Before he left, he ordered his troops to stay and defend the line to the last man.
We were slowly being wiped out. Our firing line gradually disappeared. There were only 40 to 50 rifles left firing. The time had come to send a messenger to let them know that we were all about to die here.
Around 10:30, just as the Turkish line was about to collapse, Mustafa Kemal arrived ahead of his 57th Regiment. He took command of the entire front and attacked. The battle for the heights had begun.
Everybody hurled himself on the enemy to kill and to die. This wasn't a regular battle. Everybody was hungry for either success or death. I added a verbal order to my subordinates stating, "I don't order you to fight. I order you to die." Lieutenant Colonel Mustafa Kemal.
He had this genius for reducing a problem to its very raw, simple essence. And on the first day, what he said quite simply was, we must, no matter what the cost, we must deny them the heights. We must not let the Australians get up Baby 700.
During the fierce struggle, the small hill, Baby 700, changed hands 5 times.
Now some of the chaps are getting it. Groans and screams everywhere. Calls for ammunition and stretcher bearers, though how the latter are going to carry stretchers along such precipitous and sandy slopes beats me. Now commencing to take some of the dead out of the trenches. This is horrible. I wonder how long I can stand it. Ellis Silas.
The wounded cluttered the beaches, and now Joe Cumberland was one of them. By nightfall, Mustafa Kemal and his troops held all the heights. 4,000 Turkish troops had stopped an ANZAC force 3 times their size. Once it was dark, at Helles, the remaining soldiers finally came ashore from the River Clyde. At Helles and at ANZAC, both sides had suffered heavily. One of Mustafa Kemal's battalions no longer existed.
I have no idea when the sun crossed over to the west today. Darkness fell over the sea and the whole area. Hundreds of British boys were lying on our land, never to open their eyes again. These boys, with clean-shaven and endearing faces, were curled up in their blood-stained uniforms. Their sight aroused in us feelings of both revenge and compassion. Lieutenant Ahmet Mujib.
Hundreds of dead from both sides lay between the lines in no man's land. Many of the bodies would only be recovered years later.
I certainly was very astonished that I was alive. A more hellish Sunday one could not conceive. Percival Fenwick.
This was only the beginning.
Dear Una, I suppose you received my last letter in which I told you I was slightly wounded. I'm quite well now and expect to go back to the front any time. But Una, prepare yourself to hear the worst if you've not already heard it. Poor Joe is gone. He died of wounds in Alexandria Hospital on the 5th of May. When I saw the list, I did not know what to do. I wandered about the streets nearly mad. I felt so lonely. I am letting you know at once because I think it is always best to know the truth, however sad. He died for his country, Una. I know how you will feel, sister. God help you all to bear it. Your affectionate brother, Oliver.
Total to date, 5,000 casualties, about 3 men per yard of ground gained. An order came out naming this bay ANZAC Bay, after the New Zealand and Australian division. It does not matter what it is called. Perhaps it will someday be known as Bloody Beach Bay. God knows we have paid heavily for it. Percival Fenwick.
By May the 4th, 10 days after the landing, the casualties for both sides exceeded 10,000. Already, more than 100,000 troops were on the peninsula. The French had landed and taken over the Allies' right flank at Helles. An Indian brigade with Sikhs, Punjabis and Gurkhas had also arrived. Turkish reinforcements were also arriving constantly. In the battles for Baby 700 at ANZAC and the First Battle of Krithia at Helles, each side attacked and counterattacked relentlessly, day and night.
April 30th. A bullet went right through my trouser leg, and then an Australian's 2 legs. Numbers of hats have bullet holes through them, and bully beef tins have saved a lot of lives. Just now I ceased fighting to observe, and they put a bullet right through my hat. George Bollinger.
The Turks attacked again and again, shouting, "Allah, Allah." We mowed them down, and only once did they get so close that we were able to bayonet them. We took 300 prisoners and could have taken 3,000, but we preferred shooting them. All the streams were simply running with blood, and the heaps of dead were a grand sight. Guy Nightingale.
Troops on both sides stayed on the firing line for days without any sleep. Even when they moved to the rear, soldiers had no rest. They had to unload stores, dig trenches, and haul water and ammunition to the front lines.
None of us got any sleep at night. We were exchanging fire with the enemy and trying to dig trenches and build fortifications at the same time. Everything was done at night to hide it from the enemy. Lieutenant Munim Mustafa.
In some places, especially at ANZAC, the trenches were only 5 meters apart. To show one's head above the parapet meant instant death. Grenades were thrown back and forth. Soldiers either smothered them with sandbags or threw them back before they exploded. Nowhere on Gallipoli was safe. The trenches, the beaches, and the dugouts were under constant shelling and sniper fire.
You show me a man who says he's not afraid of shelling, and I'll show you a liar. George Washington said he liked the sound of bullets whizzing over his head, but he wasn't in my war. Joe Murray.
This afternoon, pieces of human flesh rained from the sky. The enemy fired a shell from the sea, but we couldn't hear the sound. A soldier was trying to delouse himself on a hill near the sea. The shell tore through the soldier's body and blew his pieces sky high. Ismail Haqqi.
When I see the men going into the trenches, I often wonder, how many are coming out? A few minutes after they've been in, there's usually a scream, then the awful cry, stretcher bearers, and then the mangled heap is brought out. In one portion of the trenches are the remains of what had once been a human being, Ellis Silas.
On May the 6th, the Allied force at Helles attacked the Turkish lines, hoping to capture the hill called Achibaba.
We couldn't see where the firing was coming from. Down we went. We crawled on, but the bullets were hitting the sand, spraying us, hitting our packs. Young Horton, A bullet struck him dead centre of the brow, right through his head. Poor old Horton. He kept crying for his mother. I don't think he was even 16. Joe Murray.
The attack failed. Major General Hunter Weston, the British officer in command, ordered the attack to be repeated on the next day. It failed again.
Dear Mother, I led up the Dublins, and just as we got 200 men up there, the Turks opened a crossfire on us from 2 machine guns. Out of the first 6 men up there, I was the only one not hit. I had an extraordinary escape. A bullet missed me by about 1/8 of an inch and went straight into the throat of a man sitting next to me. Guy Nightingale.
Hunter Weston ordered the same attack for the 3rd day in a row. This time, the New Zealanders and Australians who had been moved in from ANZAC would also join the assault.
So another day draws to a close. With the setting of the sun, the majority of sane people prepare for the coming night and a peaceful rest. We prepared for a nightmare. Joe Murray.
Reached the firing line at last, exhausted. Bullets were whizzing past me. I wished that one would hit me. I was so dead beat. At once, we were greeted with a terrible fusillade of rifle and machine gun fire, which was deadly. Bill Deadly.
The attack fell apart again. At 3 p.m., Hunter Weston ordered the New Zealanders to repeat the attack. Nothing changed. General Ian Hamilton came ashore and ordered yet another attack. This time, the Australians would advance on the New Zealanders' right. Once again, the attack failed. After 3 days, only 600 yards had been gained. Turkish casualties numbered 2,000. Total Allied casualties were 6,000. Only a third of Guy Nightingale's battalion remained alive. The assault became known as the Second Battle of Krithia.
The planning for the Second Battle of Krithia was dreadful. The plans were ludicrously overambitious. They took no attention whatsoever of the number of troops and the state of the troops that they had to advance. They totally underestimated the Turkish opposition and the positions of strength that the Turks were holding.
The beautiful battalions of April 25th are wasted skeletons now, shadows of what they had been. General Sir Ian Hamilton.
I don't wish to be rude to the higher powers, but this seems to be an absent-minded war. The Navy can't find the enemy's guns. Ammunition for our guns is very short. Medical stores are always on the way. It is a curious deadlock, and I would very much like to live through and see the explanation, but I do not expect to do so. Percival Fenwick.
In London, the government was in turmoil. The press held it responsible for the handling of the entire war.
The British did not have sufficient materials to fight both on the Western Front and at the Dardanelles. They needed to choose one or the other. And implicitly, they chose the Western Front. The Western Front got the lion's share of the men and the munitions. So Gallipoli was always second best.
On May the 14th, the British War Council finally met for the first time in 8 weeks to discuss Gallipoli. 3 days later, Winston Churchill was forced out of the Admiralty because of his handling of the Dardanelles. A new Dardanelles committee was formed, but did not meet for another 3 weeks. In the meantime, the soldiers at Gallipoli were on their own.
You had people not united in purpose. And you can't win a war if you're not united in purpose.
The campaign was also affecting everyone in Turkey. The battle was on their soil, and news reached them quickly.
Most of those who went to Gallipoli were reported dead almost immediately. So those getting ready to leave kissed and embraced their families with great affection. They showed their love and care for each other, probably for the last time. I kissed my mother the same way, and she cried constantly as I left her. I didn't want to upset her more, so I didn't tell her that we were going to the front line at Helles. Lieutenant Munim Mustafa.
Little sleep. I dread being asleep more than awake, as my dreams are so frightful. I'm making no effort to keep a concise diary. I can only hope that I shall be able to forget it all. May 16th. In my heart, I know I am done. It would be too ghastly to bungle a message and perhaps cause the loss of the lives of many of these brave fellows. Ellis Silas.
Ellis Silas was evacuated as a psychological casualty on May the 18th and hospitalized for months. His fighting days were over. As May dragged on, the conditions in the trenches deteriorated. With the warmer weather came the flies, attracted by the putrefying corpses around the latrines and the trenches. Latrines were just openings in boxes or holes in the trench walls. The lack of sanitation and the flies spread crippling disease. Jaundice, enteric fever, typhoid, and cardiac disorders. Almost everyone on both sides suffered from some form of dysentery.
Now, this isn't just a little bit of an upset stomach. This is raging dysentery. This is people whose insides are almost coming out. This is people who have to go to the latrines 10, 12, 14, 16 times a day. This is people whose backsides are red raw. This is people who have no toilet paper. They've got nothing. They wipe their backside with their hands and then look for some grass to wipe their hands with. Now, that doesn't exactly stop the dysentery spreading either. And soon dysentery was endemic.
Many soldiers became so weak that they could hardly stand up. Some even fell into the latrines and drowned in their own excrement. By the end of May, the Allies' medical arrangements had improved. But on the Turkish side, everything remained in short supply. So doctors had to create makeshift remedies. used cotton and bandages were boiled in sodium carbonate and reused over and over.
The wounded are still lying on the bare ground, and their bandages are becoming soiled with dust and dirt. To save supplies, the wounded are not given any morphine, so soldiers shot in the head and the abdomen are in agonizing pain. Dr. Georg Meyer.
When 40,000 Turks attacked early on May the 19th, the Anzacs were waiting. Some Australians even paid other soldiers so they could get a place on the firing line. Despite wave after wave being annihilated, the Turks kept on attacking. The attack stopped at noon. Anzac casualties were 600, Turkish 10,000. More than 3,000 Turks lay dead between the lines.
From the neck all the way down that road, across Lone Pine, down to the sea, is a carpet of bodies. And that you could walk from the Anzac trench to the Turkish trench and not touch the ground because you would be walking from body to body.
The corpses swelled up immediately, and the stench of the decaying dead was worse than ever. Many soldiers became sick on the firing line, vomiting constantly, and unable to eat because of the smell. An armistice was arranged for May the 24th to bury the dead.
The Turkish captain with me said, "At this spectacle, even the most gentle must feel savage, and the most savage must weep." I talked to the Turks, one of whom pointed to the graves. "That's politics," he said. Then he pointed to the dead bodies and said, "That's diplomacy. God pity all of us poor soldiers." Major Aubrey Herbert.
For the first time since the landings, soldiers could see for themselves the effects of modern warfare up close.
The Turkish dead lay so thick, it was almost impossible to pass without treading on the bodies. The awful, destructive power of high explosives was very evident. Huge holes surrounded by circles of corpses, blown to pieces. One body was cut clean in half. The upper half I could not see, it was some distance away. One shell had apparently fallen and set fire to a bush, as a dead man lay charred to the bone. Everywhere one looked lay dead, swollen, black, hideous, and overall a nauseating stench that nearly made one vomit. At another place, a dead Turkish officer lay close to our trench, face down, grasping his revolver. In some cases, the dead actually formed part of the trench wall. It was a terrible sight to see arms and legs sticking out of the sand underneath the sandbags. I pray God I may never see such an awful sight again. I shall certainly have eternal nightmares. Beowulf Henry.
After the 8-hour armistice, the soldiers returned to their trenches, and the killing resumed.
But both sides had learned a lot about their enemy. They'd seen him at close hand. Some had even shaken hands. A new respect grew, especially among the Anzacs, for Jacko, as he became called, Johnny Turk. He got a nickname. And he became that bloke on the other side who you had to kill, who was trying to kill you. But he was someone you had to respect as well.
After that day, you suddenly notice in letters soldiers saying, whatever you may think about the Turk, he's a gentleman. There was a strange sort of honour from that moment on to the campaign.
On May the 29th, the Turks exploded a mine in front of the ANZAC trenches. This led to a new strategy. The battle would now move underground. Both sides began digging towards their enemy, often passing above or below each other's tunnels. The objective was to plant explosives underneath the opposing trenches. In a few weeks, an underground maze crisscrossed the peninsula. "What are they up to?" said a Turkish officer. "These allies will tunnel to Istanbul." Joe Murray volunteered for mining.
It is not a pleasant task to keep on digging towards the enemy when you're so near. Every time he stops, we do also. And until one of us resumes digging, we do not know whether he is making his mine ready to blow us sky high. Of course, he is in the same predicament, as he must also hear us digging. Joe Murray.
After the explosions, the troops would rush forward to occupy and fortify the craters created by the blast, and then connect it to their trenches.
Tuesday, 15th of June. Back in the trenches amongst the flies. The stench from our own dead lying out in front is terrific. It's hard to think that each of these men is some mother's son. We see such scenes as this, and still some newspapers have the audacity to suggest that we like this life. George Bollinger.
We are deadly tired of sitting under shells all day. I think the men have gotten absolutely callous. They bathe, loaf, and sit about absolutely regardless of the shells. And when a man is blown to pieces, they hardly trouble to condole with the pieces of their late comrade. War is hellish. Personally, I cannot see any hope of living through this. Percival Fenwick.
Lieutenant Colonel Percival Fenwick was evacuated from ANZAC Beach on June the 18th, suffering from typhoid fever. He continued to serve in New Zealand hospitals in England until the end of the war. Shortly after Fenwick left the peninsula, Oliver Cumberland returned.
July 13th, 1915. Dear Una, I have been back in the firing line now for about a month, and I'm getting along all right. My wound healed up beautiful and has not left any permanent injury at all. Did you ever get any message from Joe after he was wounded? You know, he was buried before I knew anything about it. Best love to all. Don't worry. Oliver.
At Helles, for more than a month between June the 4th and July the 12th, the Allies and the Turks hammered away at each other in the bloodiest battles that the peninsula had witnessed.
Our methods here seem to be based on a theory that all tactics are rot, that the only way to do anything at all is to rush forwards, ball-headed minus supports, minus reserves, and at the end probably minus a limb or two. Lieutenant Reginald Savory, 14th Sikhs.
All the nationalities involved suffered very heavy casualties, whether it was British, Indian, French, Ottoman Turks. From whatever the nationality, you began to see huge numbers of losses. The bodies began to pile up. The trenches began to smell with the decomposition. It became a horrible place.
The Allies suffered 20,000 casualties and advanced just half a mile. Trying to stop them, the Turks lost close to 50,000 men.
Bu iki kanat muharebeleri hakikaten Türkler açısından Çanakkale muharebelerin en
For the Turks, these battles on two flanks were the bloodiest and costliest of all the battles in Gallipoli. These accounted for the highest number of Turkish dead in Gallipoli.
Toplam zayiatı içerisinde büyük çoğunluğu teşkil eder.
To reduce the stench, soldiers poured gasoline on the corpses they could reach and burned them. Selahaddin Adil's division was so battered that it was ordered to withdraw to the rear.
July 15th. Dear Surette, thank God I am not ill. But 2 months of continuous struggle, hardships, and an uncertain life have taken their toll on my body. My soldiers have held their positions against the whole French and a part of the British lines. They have worn the enemy down. But I, my brave officers and soldiers, we are all finished. Saladin adieu.
It is pitiful to see men, not long ago strong and healthy. Their once schoolboy complexions have been replaced by hollow jowls and sunken eyes. Their bodies emaciated. Most of them should be in hospital. They are cheating death, but only just. They are walking corpses, the ghosts of Gallipoli. Joe Murray.
The peninsula at present consists of dust, dirt, grit, jam, bullets, and blood. I wish this beastly war was over. I'm getting absolutely fed up with fighting. Guy Nightingale.
In the sweltering summer, conditions got even worse. The heat, the lice, the flies, the dysentery, and the morale. Overcrowded trenches became ovens where men had to scour for water. Many sucked on rocks or wiped their lips with urine for a little moisture.
The only water we had to drink was limey, smelly, and bitter well water. If by any chance a little water was left in a cup, after a while a white, chalk-like sediment settled on the bottom. Lieutenant Munim Mustafa.
Tuesday, 20th of July. Today we began to sink a well on X Beach. This was really comical. Only a matter of hours ago we were sucking stones to quench our terrible thirsts. And today we're actually only a few yards from the water's edge, with as much water as we want. A bit salty, but not nearly so salty as urine. Joe Murray.
One of the things that disgusted us most was the flies. My God, what annoying creatures. Thousands of flies attacked the food on our forks while we tried to eat. We couldn't swat them away, even with our hands. Munim Mustafa.
The flies went from the feces to the jam. Their flies came from the mouths and the open wounds of the dead to the jam, to the food, into their mouths, from the open latrines. And the flies spread disease.
In July and August, disease caused by flies was so rampant that both sides evacuated hundreds of men each week. George Bollinger spent most of July in Egypt, suffering from acute gastritis. By August, 80% of the men at ANZAC had dysentery. Eventually, 20,000 Turkish soldiers would die of disease. Poor, monotonous diet compounded the illness. The Allies survived on bully beef, bacon, cheese, tea and sugar, biscuits and jam, almost always covered with flies. The bully beef and cheese melted in the heat and became inedible. The biscuits were so hard that one soldier claimed that he broke 7 teeth trying to eat them. Turkish soldiers lived on rice, pounded wheat and flour soup. Any food cooked in the rear was cold by the time it reached the troops. Both sides rarely saw any fresh vegetables or fruit.
Oh, just a drop of vinegar, or a piece of sugar, or a bowl of salad. How wonderful they would be. Just to smell or even see these delicious condiments would be enough for me. Munim Mustafa.
The Turkish soldiers lived in squalor. Most of them had not been paid for months.
We know they had very little in the way of equipment. We know they had very little in the way of clothing. A lot of clothing got swapped around. Some men didn't have boots. They literally had bandages on their feet. We know the horses were mostly in very poor condition. But strange as it seems, the morale of the Turkish army was very good.
Soldiers spent what little free time they had, talking, reading letters, harassing their enemy across the lines, and swimming.
June 23rd. I went down to the beach today. There were thousands in bathing when the enemy's shells commenced coming down. One shell landed amid a crowd on the beach and accounted for 17 casualties. The beach was soon cleared, but this sort of thing is happening every day. George Bollinger.
The French even found time for archaeological excavations, when heavy shelling unearthed some ancient statues. Later in the campaign, the Allies organized football matches at Helles. According to some soldiers, the Turks didn't fire on the players, but actually bet on the games.
Each day around noon, there was a certain amount of calm at the front, because everyone was usually at lunch. It was as if both sides had agreed to take time off from the war, so there wasn't a sound to be heard at the front. After lunch, the British sometimes held up long sticks with puppets made out of paper and rags. They moved these above their trenches, making them dance left and right. Munim Mustafa.
At ANZAC, where the opposing trenches were closer, a special relationship developed between the Turks and the Anzacs.
There was a personal dimension to Gallipoli. Not just that the trenches were so close together that both sides got to know each other in a sense. The enemies saw more of each other. The Turk was not a shadowy figure as the German was on the Western Front, except in battle. The Turk was someone with whom they became familiar, and the Anzacs were familiar to the Turks. Messages were even exchanged. Gifts were even exchanged. Turkish soldiers threw Turkish cigarettes across to the Australians. The Australians threw bully beef back. It was returned after it was opened and tried.
Some of the men even ventured into no man's land to retrieve the gifts.
Ernest was a gaunt old Turk who used to come out of his trench every morning to gather firewood. Our chaps never fired a shot for a long while. They used to chuck him tins of bully and he'd salaam and thank them. Poor old Ernest died a sudden death one morning when a new lot came in the trenches. Lieutenant Harold Eric Moody.
For everyone, letters were the strongest connection to their lives back home. Soldiers lived for news from their families. Guy Nightingale kept up a regular correspondence with his mother, sparing her no details.
June the 9th. Dear Mother, we are a very small lot of the original officers now. All the rest are new territorial officers and absolute strangers. One was hit last night during dinner and fell into the soup, upsetting the whole table and bled into the teapot, making an awful mess of everything. And we finally didn't get dinner till after dark. Guy Nightingale.
The literacy rate in the Turkish army was only 5%. But those who could wrote constantly and anxiously awaited news from home.
22nd of July, 1915. Dear Angel, let me tell you my plans. As you know, our honeymoon was spent first at the frontier and then at war. I'm saving all my money in case I survive this war and return to you. Then we can go anywhere we wish for our honeymoon. Saladin Adil.
The Turks also had special couriers who delivered messages and gifts to the soldiers from their villages. Their arrival was always a special occasion in the trenches.
The excitement of our soldiers that day was a sight to see. Some were asking about their fiancés, others about their wives. The courier was trying very hard to answer all of them and ease their hearts. He talked about the soldiers' friends and families from all the villages he could remember. He asked, "Where is Dermush's son, Kara Ali?" When he was told that Ali had been blown to pieces by a bomb 3 days ago, we saw him drift off. He was trying to figure out how he would return and give this news and the handkerchiefed gift to the Turkish girl who had sent it. Our eyes filled with tears. Munim Mustafa.
Despite all the hardships, the men hung on, both to their positions and sanity. One morning when Bill Ledley was going to the rear, he saw the remains of 20 Australians killed by a shrapnel explosion.
It was a terrible scene of slaughter. But I was struck by a rather unusual sight and went closer to investigate. Right in the center of this example of the horrors of war, one of the soldiers' packs had burst open. And lying on the ground, just as they'd fallen out, were a pair of light blue baby's shoes, and close beside them, a pair of ladies' white gloves. They looked so much out of place, lying there in the midst of so much bloodshed and carnage, and a lump rose in my throat as I thought of the owners, probably far away in Australia, who just lost the one they loved best. Did I say lost? I'm wrong. Love is never lost. It goes on and on forever, until it's lost in God, the fountain of love. So these three who loved each other, though separated now for a little while, will meet again when the shadows flee away, and will go on loving forever. Bill Ledley.
You get the impression that these men, despite the fact that they've had to do terrible things and will do terrible things, they're willing to do it, that they believe in their cause. They'll take away from this experience terrible scars, but they'll never ever have lost their humanity.
On August the 6th, the Allies launched a new major offensive to capture Chunuk Bair. Using 100,000 troops, they attacked on all fronts, first at Helles, then at ANZAC. Oliver Cumberland was in the trenches at Lone Pine at the start of the Australian attack. When the Australians surged into the Turkish trenches and tunnels, hand-to-hand fighting began underground. Men shot, choked, and clubbed each other to death. The Australians immediately captured the first line of trenches, but the Turks battled back. Both sides fought with bayonets and hand grenades. Some bombs made 3 trips back and forth before they exploded.
Bombs were going over from both sides. In the trench behind me were dead and wounded, and the soldiers were stepping over them. This increased the emotion of the troops. They were in a state of high strain. Major Zeki Bey.
The Turks stopped the Australian breakthrough at the last minute. Trenches became cluttered with dead. In some places, the corpses were piled 2 to 3 meters high.
There's several cases of Turks and Australians bayoneting each other and literally both dying at the same time, so that they were, if you like, totally linked in death and just lying there, impossible to separate.
The Turks counterattacked, but the Australians held on to their captured trenches. The Australians lost 2,000 men at Lone Pine, the Turks 7,000.
They have made the sandbags all greasy. The flies hum in a bee-like cloud. Of all the bastards of places, this is the greatest bastard in the world. Private Ian Idrius.
When the Australians went on to France and Belgium, you often see in a letter, if they've been through a particularly bad time, the point of comparison is Lone Pine. They'll say, you know, it was as bad as Lone Pine or it was nearly as bad as Lone Pine. Everyone who was there never forgot it. It was impossible to go into that place and not come out mentally scarred.
After Lone Pine, Oliver Cumberland was listed as wounded. Further north, the New Zealanders were to capture Chunuk Bair, the main objective of the whole offensive, and then to support an Australian attack at Dunek. But the New Zealanders were delayed. The Australians would have to attack the Turkish trenches alone. The men waiting at the neck were soldiers of the Australian 3rd Light Horse Brigade. At 4:30, the first wave attacked. Two minutes later, the second wave was ordered to follow. Minutes later, despite knowing what had happened to the first waves, the Australian commander ordered the third wave to attack. In the trenches, Trooper Harold Rush turned to his mate and said, "Goodbye, Cobber. God bless you," and attacked. The fourth wave was ordered to go next.
Before this had happened, it is said that a Turkish officer came to the end of one trench above the Australians and called out, "Dur, dur, stop, stop." The slaughter had become too terrible.
They attacked anyway. Within half an hour, out of 600 men, 234 were killed and 138 wounded, all in an area no larger than a tennis court.
One of the things that always haunts me when I go there is how did those men in the 3rd and the 4th line, what drove them to get out of the trench knowing that they were going to achieve nothing and that they were probably going to die.
August the 7th. I expect we shall lose a lot more good men tomorrow. So, if this is the last entry in my diary, I send my dearest love to Belle, Dad and Ma, Jack, Floss and Gwen, and hope that you will not worry too much about me. I am not afraid to die. Goodbye, if it is to be. Bill Ledley.
The next day, on August the 8th, the New Zealanders attacked at Chunuk Bair. Commanded by Lieutenant Colonel William Malone and supported by 2 British battalions, they captured the summit. When the Turks retaliated, another intense battle began.
All through that day, they exhausted each other. And it was a battle of attrition, as bloody as the Somme, as bloody as Passchendaele. But intense, because it's such a tiny piece of ground. And at the end of the day, the Turks were exhausted. The New Zealanders were exhausted.
Despite being under fire from all sides, the New Zealanders and the British held their positions. That night, Liman von Sanders gave Mustafa Kemal command of all the Turkish forces in the region. It was his battle now. Mustafa Kemal first rode to Suvla, where new British divisions had landed 2 nights before. But the new troops failed to advance because of their inexperience and incompetent commanders. Just 4 Turkish battalions had impeded their advance.
The Turkish opposition at Suvla Bay is almost an unsung tale because of people just don't seem to have grasped what a fantastic achievement it was by those 3 or 4 Turkish battalions. The way they held the outposts, the way as the British came to them, they fought and then just at the last moment evaporated it into the night or into the brush.
Early on August 9th, the British troops finally started to climb up the hills of Suvla. Mustafa Kemal attacked. All day, the Turks defeated every British attempt to advance. By nightfall, the battle for Suvla had been decided. Immediately, Mustafa Kemal returned to Chunuk Bair. That night, 2 British battalions relieved the remaining New Zealanders on Chunuk Bair. The New Zealanders had been there for 4 days and lost half of their 4,500 men. The supporting British troops had also suffered heavily, and nearly 3 Turkish regiments had been wiped out trying to dislodge them. Mustafa Kemal decided to risk everything and launch a secret attack against Chunuk Bair with all his available forces. The Turks attacked at 4:30 on the morning of August the 10th. When they withdrew, they left behind 2,000 British dead and wounded, scattered in the gullies and the scrub.
When our soldiers captured Chunuk Bair, the enemy unleashed hell on the hill with an intense naval and artillery bombardment. Chunuk Bair was completely covered with flames and smoke. Everyone just waited for their end to come next. There were dead and wounded piled up all around us. Mustafa Kemal.
Despite heavy casualties, the Turks won back Chunuk Bair. The battle was over. Once again, the Allied offensive had failed.
Mustafa Kemal, it was almost as though he thought destiny had said to him, you know what to do. And he did it, and he paid the price, and he never flinched from it.
The fighting at Suvla rumbled on throughout August. During many of the battles, the scrub caught fire.
This place is packed with bodies of dead soldiers. Some must have been wounded when they crawled here, and probably died before the fire began. Others were burnt to death. Their flesh was charred and split wide open. The tragedy of the scene is so dreadful that it makes one's hair stand up. Ismail Hakkı.
We all thought we were going to be burnt alive. We had to lie flat at the bottom of the trench while the flames swept over the top. The whole attack was a ghastly failure. They generally are now. Guy Nightingale.
By the end of August, almost every unit on both sides had been devastated.
We are really played out, and so was the whole division, and ought never to have been made to do anything. The 29th Division will never be any more good, but the people in authority seem to think we are still the same troops that did the landing. I'm sure everybody's opinion out here is, live and let live, and Turkey for the Turks. Guy Nightingale.
I don't know these British soldiers, and they do not know me. What can I say to those who made us come here and kill each other? I have sworn that I will not fire a single bullet without reason. Ismail Hakkı.
Gallipoli was the stark reality of a group of amateur citizen soldiers facing war's reality for the first time. And there was nothing glorious about it. It was mistake, blunder, muddle, death, and disease.
By October, the British government had to decide whether to prolong the campaign or to evacuate the peninsula. Winter was coming. As the politicians and generals bickered over what to do, on November the 26th, a powerful storm hit Gallipoli. Water rushed down the ravines and flooded the trenches.
The trench we had dug in the cliffside, like those on the slope, was now non-existent, filled in or washed away by the raging torrent. Stores, timber, equipment, bodies, some fresh, some decomposed. Pieces of uniform with bones protruding floated past as the rain and shelling went on without a pause. It wasn't till after the storm that we realised that a lot of people were drowned. Joe Murray.
The next morning, snow began to fall. After the hottest summer in years, the peninsula was about to have the coldest winter in decades.
Sunday, 28th November. Several inches of snow fell last night and this morning. All day long a driving snow fell. There was no inclination amongst the men to go snowballing. We were miserable. No one had contemplated this. George Bollinger.
ground is covered with 2 fingers of snow. Fairly strong cold wind blows snow into our faces. Conditions are terrible. Can't walk without slipping and sliding. If we have to go into action, what shall I do? Oh my God, help us. Lieutenant Mehmet Fasih.
The freeze lasted for another week. 16,000 Allied soldiers were evacuated with frostbite. Almost 300 died of exposure. The men were getting desperate.
I'm 21, but my hair and beard are already gray. My face is wrinkled, and my body is rotting. I can't tolerate these hardships and disasters any longer. Lieutenant Mehmet Fasih.
After 6 weeks of indecision, the British government finally decided to evacuate Gallipoli.
I'm ashamed of leaving so many of my pals behind. We all came here together, full of hope, and in the furtherance of that hope, many have died. Their hopes and their bones are scattered in this desolate waste we are about to desert. Those of us who survive will be tormented by this fiasco, even though it was no fault of ours. We fought well and suffered dreadfully. We could not do more, but in the end we deserted them. Joe Murray.
After Gallipoli, most of the British units served on the Western Front or in the Middle East. The ANZAC spirit that was born in Gallipoli grew stronger on the battlefields of Northern Europe and Palestine. The Ottoman Empire won at Gallipoli, but ultimately lost the war. They surrendered to the British, and in October 1918, the British fleet finally sailed through the Dardanelles and occupied Istanbul without a single casualty. In later years, Gallipoli became known as a campaign of what-ifs and missed opportunities. For the Turks, it was the last defiant stand of a crumbling empire. For the British, an unexpected disaster in the Near East. For some, it was a factor in the Soviet Revolution. For others, just a sideshow in World War I. Whatever its impact on history, its human toll cannot be disputed. More than 120,000 soldiers lost their lives. Bill Ledley, Joe Murray, and Selahattin Adil all survived Gallipoli and the First World War. They all lived to old age. George Bollinger survived Gallipoli, but was killed on the Western Front in 1917. The Gallipoli Campaign made Mustafa Kemal. After the Ottoman surrender in 1918, he led the Turks against the occupying forces and won back his country's independence. He then established a secular government and became its first president. To the world, he became known as Ataturk. After Gallipoli, Guy Nightingale fought on the Western Front and survived the war without a single wound. When his beloved regiment was dissolved in 1922, Nightingale was devastated. He retired from the army, became a recluse, and started drinking heavily. In 1935, at the age of 43, he shot himself. By the end of 1916, Oliver Cumberland's sister Una still hadn't heard from him. The last letter that she received was dated July 26, 1915, 10 days before the Battle of Lone Pine.
July 26th, 1915. Dear Una, I have been back in the firing line now for about 6 weeks and still going strong and in the best of health. You can understand, Una, that losing Joe has broken me up a bit. But Una, it might be for the best. War is a terrible game, especially this war. And those who are killed quick are sometimes better off. I know it is useless to ask you not to worry about me, but remember I'm used to roughing it, and wars can end suddenly as they start. And apart from the loss of poor Joe, I'm keeping my spirits up fairly well. You remember the girl in Winton you sent my photo to? Well, she has turned me down. She has only written me one letter since I left Winton, and that was only a few lines, so I've scratched her off the list. Your affectionate brother, Oliver Cumberland.
On May the 31st, 1915, a young Turkish captain wrote a letter to his parents from ANZAC. It was the longest Turkish letter to survive the battle.
Monday, May 31st, 1915. Ari Bernu. To my beloved father and mother. Dear father, beloved mother. During the first terrible battle I fought at Ari Bernu, a bullet grazed my right side and passed through my trousers. God be praised, I was spared. But I do not hope to survive future battles in which I will fight. I am writing these lines so you will have something to remember me by. I thank God that He enabled me to become a soldier and reach this rank. You, as my parents, did all you could to raise me and make it possible for me to serve my country and my people. You are my heart, you are my soul, and you are the inspiration of my life. I am eternally grateful to God and to you. Beloved Father, dearest Mother, I entrust my beloved wife and my dear son, first to God and then to your protection. Please do for them whatever is possible. Please help my wife in raising my son and providing him with the necessary education. I know that we are not wealthy or people of means, so I know I cannot ask for anything more than what is possible. To ask would be quite in vain. Please give the enclosed letter addressed to my wife into her own hands. She will be devastated, so please do what you can to console her grief. She will weep and mourn. Please comfort her. Dear relatives, beloved friends and comrades, farewell to you all. All of you please bid me farewell and pray for my soul. I will pray for yours. Beloved father and mother, I eternally entrust you to God. Farewell. Your son, Mehmet Tevfik.
Mehmet Tevfik was killed 2 weeks later.